Do you like Rook Endgames? Well, if the answer is yes, stay here, no problem at all. If you don't like them, you have to stay here because in the next 20 minutes or so, I'm going to explain you the 10 most important basic principles of Rook Endgames. Do you like this channel? Well, if you like it, make sure that you subscribe and like the video. But why Rook Endgames are so important? Well, the answer is actually very simple, but we have to go to the start of the game first. Because in the opening, you place your pawns in the center of the board, and then you're developing your minor pieces, and you get your king into safety. And only later on, the rooks are going to join play. And in the meantime, it's very likely that the other pieces are getting exchanged, and it's very likely that the rooks are the last pieces to get exchanged, so you will get a rook endgame. And to understand these rook endgames, well, there are of course a lot of principles which I'm going to share with you in this video. But also understanding these endgames, it will really help you to deepen your understanding of the opening and the middle game, because it will give you new insights on which pieces to exchange, which not. Also, it helps you to understand pawn structures better. Anyway, there is a lot to be learned from studying Rook Endgames, so let's get started. The first thing you have to know is that in Rook Endgames, you would like very often to get your Rook to the 7th rank. Why the Rook is so well placed on the 7th rank? Well, there are a couple of reasons for that. You should understand that we are talking from White's perspective. So the White Rook would like to go to the 7th rank and the Black Rook would like to go to the 2nd rank. But here, just to make it clear, I've only placed a White Rook and Black pawns. So the Rook is well placed here because it's ready to pick up all these pawns very soon. Another very important aspect, and we will talk about it more in detail later, is that the Rook will also cut off the opponent's king, and that will give you new ideas to launch a mating attack against the enemy's king, but at the same time, you're also preventing the enemy's king from joining the action very soon. So the 7th rank is usually the ideal place for a rook to go to in order to attack the king and to pick up the opponent's pawns. So then, one example, I have now placed 2 rooks on the 7th rank, and if it's white to play, he would like to give this check, rook g7, the king will have to go into the corner, and now after rook h7, king g8, you have checkmate, because the king is unable to run away as the rook on f8 prevents that. So you see that with 2 rooks on the 7th rank, you have very serious attacking ideas to deliver checkmate. So this time I have moved the rook away from f8, but I've added a pawn on h6. The same principle can be applied here. We give a check, rook h7, king g8. The other rook comes over to g7. King has to go to f8, but the extra pawn is very useful because it does protect the rook on g7, and that enables white to play here the move rook h8, and we have this typical ladder mate. The king cannot capture the rook because the pawn on h6 is very important. Now you understand what the rooks can do on the 7th rank. Let's go to the next example, because we have already seen that apart from the 7th rank, mate is playing a very important role in endgames as well. It's not that you have not that many pieces on the board so that you can no longer play for an attack. No, you should always look at what the opponent's king is capable of. Well, here in this case, the black king is stuck at the side of the board, cannot really go anywhere, but giving a check immediately with the move g4 doesn't help. It does actually allow the black king to escape. So let's take that move back and see what we can do to try to give checkmate. Well, here the key move is the move rook to a4. So the idea is that, for instance, if you take the pawn on c2, there's not much else black can do. Now we have this blockading motive. We are sacrificing our rook, and after g takes h4, it's the move g4 with checkmate. Next example. Now, it should be clear that you don't only have to give mate at the side of the board. Sometimes the king can be caught in the middle. And in this case, look, the king doesn't have that many squares to go to. We are starting here with the move king e2 to protect the pawn on d3. Whatever black does, let's say he goes away with the rook, then it's the move rook c4 with checkmate. kind of an unusual mating pattern, but I just want to make you aware of the fact that you should always look for mate. Then, okay, another very important tactical theme in Rook Endgames is the X-ray attack, or a skewer or a pin, however you would like to call it. So here, if it is white to play, you see that the king and rook, they are placed on the same file, on the same rank, pardon me, and therefore you can play here the move Rook h8. Excellent move. You see that after the king goes away, we can take the rook on a8. It's game over. If we go back and we don't play this move Rook h8, let's say it is black to move, then black could do the same by playing Rook a1 himself. So what you learn from this example is that whenever you see the king and rook standing on the same file or rank, make sure that there are possibilities for an X-ray attack, or when you're on the defensive side, make sure that the opponent cannot go for such a trick. One more example, because sometimes the king and rook, they are not placed on the same file or rank yet, but you have to make one additional step in advance. This time it's white to play, and white will play here the move king to g2, attacking the rook on h3. The rook has almost no squares to go to. The only move here is rook h4, but you have seen already rook a4 is coming now. King goes away, and then we pick up the rook. It's game over. Always look at forcing moves, also in the endgames. Then another kind of unusual idea, but definitely worth remembering. Look at this position. It looks as if black is in control. He's about to go rook f8 and wrap up the pawn when rooks are getting exchanged, and it would be a draw. But it's white to play, and can you see the decisive tactic here? It's the brilliant move f8 queen. You're sacrificing your passed pawn. It's a double check. There's absolutely no chance for the rook to capture on f8 because the king is still in check. You gotta take with the king, and now we have once again that X-ray motive picking up the rook. So always look at forcing moves once again. So another very important theme in Rook Endgames are passed pawns, because pawns are becoming more and more important towards the end of the game, especially when they are advanced and they are free to move forward. Look at this position. The h pawn is really doing well now. It's about to promote. But look, if you push the pawn right now, the black rook will get behind and the pawn will be taken. So that's not a good idea. We gotta make sure that once we push the pawn, the black rook is unable to stop it. So therefore, there is this brilliant tactical idea here for white to sacrifice the rook with the move rook h5. The rook is standing behind the passed pawn. It's another topic we will talk about very soon. The key point is that we are trying to push the pawn to h7. If you take the rook, it's h7, and look at this rook. It cannot come back to stop the pawn, prevent it from queening. Next example, once again, we have a passed pawn, but also with the help of passed pawns, we have these ideas to play for an X-ray attack. This time, we start with the move rook h8. So the rook covers the promotion square. We are about to get a new queen. Black would have to give up the rook, and then we have a situation with king and rook to deliver checkmate. That should be no problem. But after rook takes a7, only move now. The rook comes back one square, and we pick up the rook on the next move. Another trick with a passed pawn here is that we would love to push the pawn from a6 to a7 and a8. But if we start with that, there is rook h8 and the rook is back in time. If you try rook a1, it's rook a8 and the pawn has been stopped. So that's not a good idea. But instead, we can understand what black would love to do. Therefore, we start here with the brilliant rook sacrifice, rook d8, preventing the rook from coming back. After king takes d8, it's a7, and on the next move, we get a new queen. There's nothing black can do against it. Also, if you would decide not to take the rook, but play here rook takes c4, we would play a7, and on the next move, it's a8 queen as the rook covers the promotion square. Then, we have seen a lot of tactical ideas, but I would also like to show you some more positional aspects of this kind of endgame. Because in the endgame, we have already seen that the rook is excellently placed on the 7th rank. So here, we have a game, famous game, Capablanca against Tartakower, in which white has an excellent rook on the 7, but black is about to capture this pawn on c3. And then, we don't know, maybe black is able to create passed pawns himself. At the moment, the white rook is unable to do anything here himself, but if the white king would be able to support that, things can become very unpleasant. Therefore, in endgames, you should try to activate your king. And the following example is really important for your understanding of rook endgames. White played here the move king g3, allowing black to take the pawn on c3 with check, but now the king comes in to h4. We don't care about what's happening on the queen side. We have a very simple plan. Black played here the move rook f3, threatening to win the pawn, and basically white cannot do anything against it. But white played here the move g6. Fantastic idea. Giving up the pawn on f4. Black is playing like Pac-Man, capturing one pawn after another. But now the white king is sliding in. Via g5, it's on its way to f6. If you would take the pawn on d4 now, there is this move king f6. And now all of a sudden you see that the king and the g-pawn, they are playing a very important role. It's white who is threatening to give checkmate with rook h8. So the king goes to g8, and now one very important moment, like you see that black is a couple of pawns up, but the rook is out of play, unable to help in defense, unable to give check to the white king. The key move here is not to play here the move rook takes c7, renewing the mating threat on c8, because black still has the move rook c4, defending the c8 square. And if the rook moves, then let's say you take the pawn, it's rook c8, and it's still a fight. Instead, we should make sure that the black rook is unable to come back in defense, and therefore the move rook d7 is the fantastic move here. With the point, there is nothing black can do against rook d8 with checkmate. I thought this is a very interesting example, because you see now it's not about the number of pawns, it's all about the piece activity. With the help of the rook, the king and the pawn, we launch a decisive mating attack. Next example is another classical game of Lilienthal against Smyslov, played in Moscow 1941. Look at this position. White has just given a check, and well, if you would go back with your king, there is rook f6, and this pawn is going to drop very soon. But as a rule of thumb, even when you're on the defense, try to play actively. So in the game, Smyslov played here the move king e5. He didn't care about the pawn on c6. He just followed up with king e4, white captured another pawn, and you would love to play king f3 now. But the problem is there's rook takes f5, check, and there's no time to give checkmate. You have to move the king, and then it's rook takes g5. There are no mating threats, and you're 4 pawns down. That's simply too much. Let's take it back 2 moves. Instead of playing the move king f3, you better start here with the move f4, sacrificing a pawn. What's the idea of that move? Well, if you take the pawn, now we go with our king to f3, threatening checkmate. Once again, black is 4 pawns down, but this threat is really strong. You cannot move your rook, you cannot move your king, you cannot capture the pawn. The only move here is h3, just to make sure that if you do give a check, the king can go to h2, but then it's a repetition of moves. So despite being 4 pawns down, black, thanks to its actively placed king and rook, he's able to secure a draw. Another very important idea, we have already briefly touched upon this topic. Whenever you have a passed pawn, it's very often a good idea to let this passed pawn receive the support from its rook. And the best way to do it is by placing your rook behind the passed pawn. If you push your pawn too quickly, then in that case, the enemy's rook may still be able to get behind the passed pawn, and this time black is even going to wrap up the pawn on a7. Don't do that. Instead, you better start here with the move rook a1, so that the rook is excellently placed, supporting the advance of the a-pawn. And look at this black rook, it's unable to get back in time. If you go rook f2, we go a7. If you play rook f8, white is just faster and can queen first, and of course white will have no problems winning this endgame. So general rule of thumb, place your rook behind the passed pawn. So in the previous example, we saw that it was very tactical. We could just immediately promote. But many times it's not even possible. But we can still get our rook behind the passed pawn. It's a fantastic place for the rook. Why? The rook can still easily make moves along that file, while its counterpart is just a really bad piece. The rook on a8 can never move away. Whenever the rook goes away, it's a8 queen and you win the rook. For instance, if black goes king f6, we will play king f4. And black is kind of in zugzwang. He cannot make a move with its king. He cannot make a move with its rook, so he has to move with its king. King goes to g7, and now the king comes into g5, king f7, and now we see exactly what I've mentioned before. The rook can even come over to a6, so it's not only supporting the pawn, it's even working along the 6th rank, ready to pick up the pawn on g6, or even the pawns on f5 and h5 after that as well. That's why the rook is so well placed behind the passed pawn. Next example. This time I've placed the pawn one square backwards. Just I want to show you that very often when you have the more active king, you can just try to approach that passed pawn. So let's say king d4, king e6, king c5, king d7, king b6. The rook is in trouble. Rook goes away, king b7. The rook has to leave, and now the a pawn is simply too strong. White wins. Another very important topic in Rook Endgames is how to defend. So I'm going to show you a couple of examples how to defend in Rook Endgames. Well, here the situation is it's pretty bad for white. He's 2 pawns down, and if black would play something like king e4 with the idea to bring the king over to this pawn, it's very likely that white is just going to lose. But in the game, black thought, let's play here the move b2. And then later on the king can move over. But look the trick here. White decided to take the pawn on b2. Now after rook h2, looks as if you're winning the rook thanks to a skewer. But there is this move, king f3. And then all of a sudden, after rook takes b2, it's stalemate. In Rook Endgame, stalemate is very often a very important defensive resource. Don't forget that when you're on the defense. This is just an amazing example. It happened in the game Bernstein against Smyslov in 1946. Brilliant defensive swindle by white. One more example. As for instance here, this position it's really bad. It's actually a study. And black's plan is very simple, to wrap up this pawn and bring over the king to support. But look what white is going to do. He's going to create a stalemate pattern himself by placing the pawns on g4 and g3. Black is going to take the pawn. And then all of a sudden we bring our king to h3 with the point that once the king is coming over, we have this brilliant move, rook takes a2, rook takes a2, and since the rook is cutting off the 2nd rank, it's anyway a stalemate. Of course, this is very difficult to find, but just realize that stalemate could be a weapon trying to save the half point. Now a more technical aspect of Rook Endgames, because we have seen already that a rook is ideally placed on the 7th rank, with one of the main advantages being that you're cutting off the opponent's king on the back rank. Now this time the king is on f6, and the king would love to come back and stop the pawn. Even if you push the pawn now, there is king g6 and black is sort of okay. But if you can prevent the black king from approaching the pawn, things are not that simple for black. So here the key move is rook g8. You're cutting off the king along a file. So the black king is helpless, cannot stop the pawn. Just 3 more moves to go and we have a new queen. Only the rook can still try to get behind. So you would like to try rook a1 with the idea rook h1 and neutralize the h-pawn. But there is this move king to g2. And look at this position. There are 3 more moves to go. But there's absolutely no way the king is able to come back or the rook will stop the pawn. Even if you try rook a4, rook h4, that's not possible because the pawn on g3 covers the square. White is just winning. Just an amazing example how to think prophylactically and neutralize the defensive idea of black here. We have seen that for tactical purposes, cutting off a king can be just very useful, but also from positional perspective. Here we have just a theoretical position with a king and pawn, but look at this king, it's really far away. Black wishes that the king was in front of the pawn. We will get to that position later on. But the king is now far away and unable to help in defense. What white is going to do is very typical. He's going to play king b4. And now the plan is very simple, to bring up the pawn and king, and eventually the king and pawn will do the job. So the only attempt here for black is to give a check. If the king a5, rook c8, the rook attacks the pawn. King b5, rook b8, king a6. Now rook c8 back, attacking the pawn on c4. Now if the king goes back, that would only be a repetition of moves. But now the key idea is to play the move rook c1. The rook is no longer cutting off the king, but the king is too far away. And white's king is very active. After king f7, we are pushing the pawn. King e7, we go king b7. We are kicking the rook away. If the rook goes away, it's just going to be c6, c7, c8, new queen. Boom. King can go to d7, but then there are many moves. c6 is a good move, but we can also play rook d1, forcing the king to go away. And next move, we take the rook. So keep in mind that if you have the chance to cut off your king along a file, that could be a very nice attacking weapon for yourself. Now, one very important thing here is the only position you really have to know by heart. And you don't have to remember the exact position, but you have to remember the defensive technique. So you're on the defensive side here as black, and your plan is to make a draw. But what you should not do is just make waiting moves, because if you're just going to make waiting moves, the king is going to move up the board, rook b8, and white's going to play f6. And this is all of a sudden theoretically winning with the king and pawn on the 6th rank. After rook c8, the winning technique here is rook g7 check, king f8, and now rook h7, threatening mate and or a skewer. If the king goes to g8, then we have the move f7, king f8, and rook h8. We are picking up the rook on the next move. So we understand that passive defense is not good. What we have to do instead is playing here the move rook b6. So we are cutting off the white king along the 6th rank. The king is unable to go there. And if white's going to make waiting moves, we can make waiting moves along the 6th rank as well. The only attempt for white now is to push the pawn. And then you see that if white could play another move, there would follow king to g6, followed by rook a8, or the same mating idea we have seen in the previous line. But now, having provoked white to push the f-pawn, there is this idea to go for the move rook b1. And that's very, very important, because now the king is no longer able to hide in front of the pawn. After king g6, we have rook g1 check. After king f5, we have rook f1, king e6, rook e1. We can just keep on giving checks and eventually just make a waiting move. Put your king in front of the pawn. Now the white king is actually cut off, and it's just an easy draw. What you have to know, this is what we call the position of Philidor. And it's the 6th rank defense, what you have to realize here as black. Rook b6 is the simplest way of making a draw. And what is important to remember is that the pawn can also be somewhere on f2, and you can have the king on g2. That's not a problem. You just keep your rook on the 6th rank. If white's going to play a move like rook c7, we can make a move like rook a6 ourselves. The moment white goes f6, then we go down with our rook and start giving checks from behind. This is a theoretical draw, and if you only have to know one particular position in Rook Endgames, it's actually this one. Just one more example here is the following position. We have very similar position, but now the big problem for black is actually the pawn on e5. If the pawn on e5 would not be there, it would be a draw, as the rook could just keep giving checks. But it's white to move, and white is going to play the move king e6, and that's such an important idea in Rook Endgames in general. You can use the enemy's pawn as a shield. This pawn is just standing in the way, preventing the rook from giving a check, so the white king can safely hide there, and your threatening mate. King g8 is like only move, and then rook a8, king h7, f7, and it's game over. So I think these positions, they were very useful. I hope you liked it. And well, if you do have any questions, or you feel like some positions are missing, please let me know in the comments below this video. Make sure to subscribe to the channel if you would like to see more educational content on Rook Endgames or on any other topics. Thanks for watching, and see you soon. Bye bye.